I'm Nedra Knurk, President of Futuro RGV, and I want to welcome Ford Sasser, President and CEO of Rio Bank. And Ford came to the bank, I believe, in 1999, thereabouts, right, Ford?
That's correct. That's when I started
Okay.
at yeah, at Rio Bank.
But even more exciting to me, Rio Bank opened their new corporate banking center just last fall in a very impressive 6-story building on the expressway with major operations and executive officers housed on the 6th floor with some great views of McAllen. And if you'll look beyond Ford, you'll see that wonderfully big
Oh,
picture window with the view from the 6th floor of McAllen.
I'd forgotten that they moved.
Yes. And then shortly after, the UTRGV president and other institutional leaders of UTRGV joined them on the 5th floor. And that is of tremendous benefit, not only to UTRGV, but also to the city of McAllen and the valley. So I got to know Ford when Camp University was housed at my church. And Ford has been a tremendous friend and supporter of Futuro as a long-term sponsor and as a Futuro RGV advisor. So I do want now to thank Ford and the Rio Bank and our other Futuro RGV sponsors who help us bring these discussions to you. And you'll see the chart with our sponsors, Rhodes Enterprise, Sam Garcia Architect, Frost Bank, IBC Bank, Rio Bank, DHR Health, Clark Chevrolet, Val Peason, Ernie Williams, and we want to thank all of them. These discussions and those of other Valley leaders will be on the Futuro RGV Facebook page, YouTube, and social media for further viewing. So Ford, Futuro RGV is interested in how our communities are coping with the health, education, and economic issues as we adjust to living with this COVID pandemic. Now, Ford is involved in supporting many community activities that benefit so many of us in the Rio Grande Valley. And Camp University, which I mentioned, was founded by Ford and his family. And it's one important gift to our families as it provides opportunities for special needs young adults to continue developing life and social skills after high school. And of course, as a Futuro RGV advisor, yay, Ford is very helpful to me. So thank you, Ford. And now moderator Davis Rankin and Ford Sasser will discuss ideas on what the pandemic has taught us about our lives and the future. So Davis and Ford,
Well,
you're on.
thank you. Yeah, one thing I I want to make sure is have enough money in the bank to continue. If you're actually, that's probably good advice for everybody. Ford, thank you very much, obviously, for being with us. Before we get started on the banking business, tell us about yourself. What do we need to know about you?
Well, let me start off, Davis, by Nedra was very kind, but I really want to thank her for what she does for the city of McAllen and frankly for the entire Rio Grande Valley. I think what she does through Futuro and many of the other things she's involved in, I think our city's been blessed to have Nedra Knurk
Yep.
as one of our citizens. And um, Davis, I am not originally from the Valley. As the joke goes, I wasn't born here, but I got here as quick as I could. But actually, I grew up in San Antonio. I kind of come from an agriculture background. My daddy was in the tractor business. We sold John Deere tractors
Oh,
growing up, and I know my dad was a good friend with the Barbie Newhouse folks, and
yeah.
back in those days, we had ranching operations, and so agriculture was kind of in my blood. And And when I got out of, when I was at school at A&M, I studied agricultural economics. My daddy had gone to school at A&M. That's what he studied. And then I got into the banking business out of school, working first with the Texas Department of Banking as a bank examiner. And
Ooh.
it was as a bank examiner how I got my introduction to the Rio Grande Valley. One of the last places they moved me, and they moved me quite often. We moved I started in Austin. They moved me to Odessa, to Amarillo, to Dallas. I spent some time in Longview before they moved me to McAllen, where I examined banks from Laredo to Brownsville, pretty much up and down the river. As a
Wow.
matter of fact, I gave McAllen State Bank their very first examination after they moved into the Newhouse Tower. And so that kind of dates when I first got introduced to the Rio Grande Valley. And I worked in examined banks down here for about a year and a half. I left the Valley and went to work at a bank out of Corpus Christi in the town of Beeville,
Hmm.
and lived there for about 6 years before moving back to the Valley, and have been here ever since. So, as Nedra said, I worked at a couple of banks before I settled here at Rio back in 1999. Rio National Bank was started in 1985, so I wasn't here for its origin.
Yeah.
But in 1999, I came to work at Rio National Bank.
Mhm.
2 years later, we changed our charter from a national charter to a state charter, and we dropped the word national from our name. And so today we're just known as Rio Bank. And we have offices now from Brownsville to Roma in the three counties, Starr, Hidalgo, and Cameron. And as Nedra said, we just moved into our new corporate headquarters on the expressway, and are real proud of our facilities. And it's my hope that we've created a landmark in not only McAllen, but the Valley that everybody can be proud of.
It's on the expressway, right? By
It is. We're at the corner
Second
of
Street.
McCall Road and the expressway.
Okay.
You can't miss us.
Um, it's not, it doesn't light up, but you see the buildings in downtown Dallas. That's what I remember. The
Yeah.
mobile building. Yours doesn't do that, right? So
No, ours doesn't do that. We're kind of small town, big city building.
hi, come on in. You ought to, that would be funny, at least to me. We can come back to some of this, but we talked about this before we started going on the record. It occurred to me, what is a bank? When did banks, as we understand them, start?
Yeah. Banks have kind of evolved over the years, and quite frankly, they've even evolved quite a bit in the period of time that I've been in banking.
Yeah.
But I was telling you before we went on record that what kind of got me interested in banking is one of my required courses when I was in school was a course called Money and Banking, an economics course. And I can remember the professor talking about how banks create money. And I thought that was an interesting concept. And the way I would explain it is if Nedra Knurk deposits $10,000 in my bank, and I use that $10,000 to loan it to Davis Rankin, now Davis has $10,000 and Nedra has $10,000. So I've just created $20,000 out of $10,000. And so how does that impact us in a community? Well, what that does is start creating economic growth. In other words, Nedra's got her money. Now Davis has $10,000 to spend or invest in our community. And so by banks lending money and taking people's deposits, lending that money back out, we're able to leverage those dollars and create economic stimulus to the economies in the markets that we serve. And I think that's a very positive thing. It's kind of what attracted me to banking. I just thought, wow, what a great profession to be able to help people to be successful in life and play a small part in the success of people's financial goals.
How and how do you know who to loan to? And what I want to get at is what sectors do you decide to loan into? My understanding is bankers um, don't know all businesses, so they're loath to loan to people they don't understand how it works. And you can't tell people what to do, but how do you decide what to do? And I guess, what do you think is the coming sector in the Rio Grande Valley? And we probably ought to relate this, if you can, to how it was and how coronavirus has changed that, if it has.
Yeah, well, probably the basic question of, how do you know who to loan to and who not to? Obviously, there are some industries that we just don't have expertise in. And if we don't have expertise in it, then, it's like anything else, whether you're a bank or you're just a business person looking at making an investment, you're going to invest in those things that you
Oh
understand.
yeah, sure.
And so,
You understand agriculture, I'm assuming.
sure, we understand agriculture. We understand, our particular bank. I'll say this: when I came to work at the bank in 1999, my predecessor was primarily a retail lender. Most of our bank's loans were automobile financing. A commercial loan to our bank was floor planning used car lots and that type thing. When I came, I was interested in, that wasn't an industry that I felt comfortable with. I was more interested in real estate. Probably 80% of our loan portfolio today is collateralized by real estate.
Mm-hmm.
I like real estate for several reasons. It doesn't rust. It doesn't get across the river into Mexico. My customer can leave town, but he can't take my collateral. But more
You're loaning
important,
to the wrong people if you have to worry about that.
and more important than that, though, is I'm able to make a real estate loan on a long-term amortization. So I can put a real estate loan on the books this month on a 15-year amortization, and then do another one next month on a 15 or 20-year amortization. And pretty soon, I'm growing the loan portfolio. I'm growing the size of our bank, and so that has served us well. By making that change and going in a different direction. So anyway, you just try and stick with those things that you understand, and try and stick with customers that you understand. I often tell my lenders that there's remember, when you loan money, whatever the contracted interest rate is, that's the very best that the bank is going to get. So if I loan Davis Rankin money at 6% interest, 6% is all I'm going to get. But if Davis is in business for himself, sky's the limit on how much you can make. And so what I have to be careful of is I don't want to take an investor's risk and only get a lender's rate of return. So when the business people talk about their bank being their partner, well, we like to jokingly refer to it that way, but in reality, not your partner. You have no intention of giving me more than that contracted interest rate. So we're only going to take, you're not going to share your profits with us. So we're going to only take a lender's risk, and try not to take an investor's risk. So
the bank being your partner means that the bank's money the business is not performing, not doing as well as you had hoped, or they had hoped, and
so that
is that right?
Yeah. So the objective is, if the business doesn't work out the way the investor thought it was, the investor needs to be the investor's risk. of taking the
Yeah.
loss, and we try and minimize the lender's risk, because like I said, our upside potential is capped and
Yep.
at the contracted rate. And so you have to kind of be careful that you don't cross that line and start taking an investor's risk, only getting a
Yeah.
lender's rate of
Limited rate of
return.
return.
So
Do,
I
do
hope
you,
that makes sense.
yeah, I think it'll make sense to anybody who's ever had a note at the bank. I remember one time when I was a part owner of KURV, I realized they want their money back. I mean, it had never been real, it never really come home to me. I signed all the papers, and I made my payments, but then I thought, ooh, what, if I were in your situation and somebody came to me now, I would want them to have more money in the bank or in reserves or in savings against that day when there's another pandemic, to use that as an example. Is that, what's the pandemic going to do to those sorts of things?
You know, the pandemic has affected banks just like it's affected the entire economy. I'll tell you that we have some customers had a record year in earnings
Yeah.
or sales in 2020. There are other sectors of the economy that have really suffered. Obviously, the hospitality business. You know, anytime you take a
Yeah.
restaurant, you tell them you have to close, or you can reopen, but you can only reopen at 50% capacity or 25% capacity. Any of those things are devastating to some of these businesses. The
Yeah.
hotel businesses, you know, if people aren't traveling, then they're not staying in hotels. So, so the hospitality industry's really had problems. The construction industry, we've got some construction customers that have done very well.
Mm-hmm.
So it's affected different folks in different ways. And so going forward, probably the way we look at, we're all products of our experiences. And so
Yeah.
none of us in the banking business have ever really been through anything like this. And so it's been a learning experience for all of us. So how 5 years from now, how we're approving loans and addressing contingency planning for another pandemic is those are the kind of things we're going to be looking at, whereas 5 years ago we would have never looked at those types of things. And so it's going to be a learning experience, and has been a learning experience for all of us, both in and out of the banking business.
You are the loan officer who's loaned the money and is handling the account, cannot call up somebody because they're concerned that that person is not getting the revenues everybody thought they were going to get, or they don't have any money. They're spending everything they get, whether it's frivolously or not. You can't call them up and say, you got to do something to get some more money in the bank, in the savings.
Well,
I'm not saying about morally, but legally you can't do that, can you?
Well, that's not exactly right. We stay in pretty close contact with our customers, and most of our customers, frankly, do a good job of staying in touch with us.
Yeah.
I can remember as a kid, I already told you my daddy was a businessman and had his own business, and I can remember my daddy coaching me and telling me as a young man, son, you don't ever keep secrets from your banker or your preacher. And so that was kind of ingrained in me growing up, and so I kind of expect that of my customers. In other words, we want to have an open conversation with each other. Contrary to what some people might think, there isn't a banker in the world out there that wants your collateral. All they want is their money, and they're going to work with their customers any way they possibly can to keep their business viable, and be able to help them reach the point where they can ultimately repay their loans. And the only way we can do that is through communication. And as I tell my loan officers all the time, and they tell their customers, that the customer needs be in touch with their banker to tell their banker, this is what my plan is. I'm having this problem, but this is my plan for
Yeah.
getting out of it. And absent the customer coming up with that plan, then the banker has to come up with that plan. And the customer might not like the banker's plan. And so I always encourage business people to, maintain that conversation with
Yeah.
their banker, because all the banker wants to know is that you're worried about it and you have a plan to deal with the problem. But if you stick your head in the sand and ignore the problem, then that's
Yeah.
what makes bankers nervous, and that's what makes bankers then start taking aggressive steps that maybe
Yeah.
weren't necessary had communications been better.
What's an interest rate now? I don't even, since I don't have to, I'm not a KURV on the loan anymore. I don't know what
Yeah,
I would borrow
well,
money at.
New York Prime is like 3.25%. That's the lowest it's been I think, in my lifetime. And I don't think there's really any downside potential to interest rates. The Fed has done everything they could to stimulate the economy during this pandemic, and bringing interest rates down was certainly one of the tools that they have in their toolbox. And it looks like rates are going to be down for the foreseeable future. Well, that's a very positive thing for our customers, because interest rates staying down, tax rates, the tax cuts we had a couple of years ago, between those two things, that has really helped a lot of businesses survive. But you start raising interest rates, you start raising taxes, that's less money available for businesses to service their debts, and you're going to start seeing more failures. So anyway, I don't anticipate seeing tax rates going up, and I don't anticipate seeing interest rates going up anytime soon. So, but I would say,
Has the pandemic changed what sectors in the Valley you all want to loan into? Or has it opened up opportunities that weren't there
well, as I
2 years
mentioned
ago?
a while ago, the hospitality business is certainly taking it
Yeah,
on the
boy.
chin. And I mean, I go to restaurants almost every day for lunch someplace, and everyone I
Eat
go
local.
into, and I eat
Yeah.
local, and I try and support our local merchants whenever I can. But when I do, I see that they have about every other table blocked out. And so, I
Yeah.
mean, you know, well, okay, knowing those kinds of things, I'm not sure that I'm interested in helping a startup restaurant today. And I'm not real sure that a startup restaurant would be a good idea for anybody. Hotel business is starting to pick up.
Yeah.
You know, some of these hotels have had some government contracts and contracts with the
Yeah.
hospitals and nurses and things here in the Valley, so that some of our hotels, frankly, have weathered the storm pretty well. But your higher dollar hotels are
Yeah.
uh,
They say it's
some
going to
of
be
the flash.
a slaughter
It's
nationally. Just it's
it's
going to be
been
horrible, they say.
pretty bloody, yeah. And so obviously, if you know you're loaning into an industry or a sector of the economy that has been hardest hit by the pandemic, you're probably going to be more cautious in
Mhm.
who you're going to loan to, how much equity they're going to put into the project, versus in times like this, versus maybe when we're not in times like this.
Pandemic that has not, we don't have a whole lot of time left, but I would think the pandemic has not particularly affected agriculture or, I'm trying to say, agriculture, cross-border traffic with Mexico. I mean, that's going to come back eventually, I suppose. What
Yeah,
do
well,
you
it's
assess
affected
as,
us with Mexico from the retail standpoint. I
yeah,
think a lot of our retailers who have depended on the Mexican shopper have negatively been impacted.
oh yeah,
But one good thing about agriculture is everybody has to eat. But on the other hand, I know cattle prices have been down. Well, if the steakhouses aren't open, then
Yeah,
they're not buying beef, So
no.
there is some areas that have been impacted for reasons like that. Uh, so I mean, indirectly or
Can you eat your
directly.
collateral? If
I'm
you've
sorry.
collateralized a herd, if you've collateralized cattle, can you eat them? And when you go in and repossess, you repossess the cows on
Well,
the hoof.
if
I
you
don't know
have
why
to
that strikes me as
repossess,
funny.
yeah. Well, if you, I have
What are
repossessed
those
cattle
cows doing in
before.
your parking lot?
I have repossessed cattle, but we usually just take them straight to the auction barn and sell them. So we don't put them in the pens behind the bank.
That's something to think of with that extra land. Or you could give them to your directors or the employee of the month.
Yeah.
Um, come get your reward. Any last things you want to say, especially oriented to the future? This is a fraught, my favorite word, it's a fraught time, not just for the pandemic. If you read widely, you'll see that they've been predicting pandemics for a while.
Sure.
And politically, it's unlike anything in my lifetime. Um,
Well, let me kind of wrap up on a more positive note, because I
yes,
am
please.
optimistic going into the new year. I'm optimistic because we now have vaccines that are out there. People
Yeah.
are taking them every day. I took my vaccine shot last Wednesday, and
How'd you get on the list, Ford?
well, you have to be the president of a bank. You have to know people,
Well,
Mark. Yeah, I'm just
hey, Ford,
kidding.
we got an extra shot. You want to come on over?
But as the vaccines get more, as we get more and more of our population
Mhm.
vaccinated, my hope and expectation is we're
Yeah.
going to see the number of cases of coronavirus diminishing, the number of
Yes.
deaths diminishing. As those things start taking place, I think we're going to start seeing the restaurants opening back up, people traveling more, and life starting to return to normal. I still don't think this is the new normal. I don't think there's such a thing as a new normal. I think that we're going to go back to people wanting to be with people and not
Yes.
isolated. I don't think that's
I
healthy,
agree with you.
and I don't think it's good for us as individuals, and it certainly isn't good for our economy.
Nope. Ford, Ford Sasser is the president and CEO of Rio Bank, which has branches up and down the Rio Grande Valley. We did not talk about any expansion plans, but I didn't figure I'd get a straight answer anyway. So everybody seems to want to be in Falfurrias and Hebronville, so I'll leave it at that. Ford, thank you very much, and another good entry into Futuro RGV's look at life before and after the pandemic and what we can look forward to.
Davis, thank you, and thank you, Nedra.
Yes, sir.
And thank you very much, Ford and Davis. As always, these conversations are very, very interesting and informative. And
Oh,
as always, Ford, I thank you for your friendship, your advice to Futuro and to me, and your advice to our community. So thank you, and we'll wrap it up there.